In the end, I had to make a decision about whether I was going to be a mom first, an activist first. Actually, the rhetoric started early in 2015 because we have such a long campaign period in the US, right? So all of 2015 felt like this buildup of anti-Muslim rhetoric. And it wasn't just Trump, it was Ted Cruz, you might remember as well. Both of them were calling for, and even Ben Carson was sort of jumping on the bandwagon a little bit. The only one who held back was Jeb Bush. Yes. He actually called it out, interestingly enough. But at that time, it was sort of a panel of Republican candidates that were talking about surveilling Muslims. Trump talked about registering us and issuing us IDs.
Yes.
There was some discussion of closing masjids or mosques in the country. It was an incredibly escalated, and when Jeb Bush actually spoke out against it, he mentioned internment, which I think was something that a lot of us were terrified about, because registration feels like just the step before internment. So, but there was a lot of this sort of vitriolic anti-Muslim rhetoric, and it was the kind of rhetoric that you really could not aim at any other ethnic, religious, or racial demographic in the country. None of that would have been acceptable if it had been aimed at any other demographic. And so my feeling, and I knew that because I had studied civil rights law, I had a special interest in social justice, I had sort of watched the evolution of both the law and the culture around equity in the country very closely, because as a lawyer, I practiced in neighborhoods and communities that were mostly folks of color. So I was really deeply invested in our interests and sort of where we were. And of course, that's not one monolith. We all occupy various sort of spaces and places in the American psyche. But as a whole, I was really interested in that. And so to see Muslims take this enormous step back, even from where they were after 9/11, which was scary enough. But it was almost a devolution from that. No, it wasn't almost, it was really a devolution from that. And the most important thing, I think, about the political stage was that it was the state. These weren't like the heads of an evangelical church somewhere, or a right-wing neo-Nazi group, or even my neighbor down the street. This was a presidential campaign.
Exactly.
And these were presidential candidates. And I thought, my God, if this is what they're not only willing, but able to espouse from the podium in a presidential campaign, what does that mean for us? I went on MSNBC, and I have no real media experience. So here I am in this green room. I go on, and I can't even, I'd have to think to figure out who the commentator I was talking to was, but I was expecting someone to sort of earnestly talk to me about Dear Non-Muslim Allies, that post, because that's what triggered the invitation to go on. And instead, what the commentator did was flashed an excerpt of a nameless, identityless, brown, presumably Muslim man yelling "Death to America." And that was what I was supposed to respond to. And I was so thrown off kilter. And I don't think I responded to it very well at the time. I was totally unprepared.
Well, blindsided.
But I was blindsided. And what I thought was MSNBC in that period of time became the highest rated, most watched American cable news show in prime time.
Mm-hmm.
It was not like I was talking to like Fox News. This was mainstream American news, and this was how I was being approached with an obvious racist um, stereotype that implied a sort of um,
Mm.
group guilt, right?
Yeah.
Here, Sofia Ali Khan, who lives in Bucks County in the Delaware Valley and has done civil rights law for the last 15 years, answer for this random guy on the other side of the world
Yeah.
who's yelling death to America. It doesn't make any sense. It would be
It
like
doesn't.
taking any individual person of any racial or religious group and saying, answer for the worst thing that some other person I associate with you has done, right? We don't do that to anybody.
No, we don't.
So this is my world in 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
I had been an activist and a lawyer my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, okay, all this is happening. This is kind of like what an activist lives for. This is the fight. This is when the rubber hits the road, right? We're either going to move towards democracy as a whole and equality as a whole, or it's going to fall away. So I didn't even think about giving up that fight. I thought, because my contract for the legal work I was doing, the legal consulting I was doing had just ended. And my thought, half of my brain was like, how do I work most efficiently for the public good, for my country that I love and my community that I love? Do I go back into working for CARE? Because as you mentioned in the intro, I had helped found CARE in Philadelphia. I had a lot of connections in that community.
Okay.
Do I go to the border? You know, what do I do, right? Or do I run for public office, right? Because here I am in this purple county that often tips elections one way or another. Bucks County is very historically a sort of bellwether of which way an election will go.
All right.
So it felt sort of perfect to be positioned there. I thought about running for local office. But then I had this sick kid. We couldn't get her a diagnosis. We had been to 20 specialists.
Wow.
And in the end, I had to make a decision about whether I was going to be a mom first, an activist first.